Hey, amazing viewers! I love connecting with all of you from around the world. Stay with me until the end, because this story is packed with surprises that will leave you inspired and thinking differently. Today's twist is something no one saw coming. And if it's your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Show some love by liking the video. And don't forget to share it with your friends. The rain came down in thick sheets, drumming against the pavement like a relentless march. The town of Clearwater was no stranger to storms, but tonight's downpour felt different. Colder, heavier, as if the sky itself carried a sorrow too great to hold back. Dr. Evelyn Harper sat in her dimly lit veterinary clinic, rubbing the fatigue from her temples. It had been a long shift, and she was minutes away from locking up when a sound cut through the rhythmic patter of rain. Soft at first, then persistent. A scratching at the door. She hesitated, glancing at the clock. Nearly midnight. Probably just the wind, she reasoned. But then it came again. Steady, deliberate, almost pleading. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she stepped to the door and cracked it open. And there he stood. An old German shepherd, his fur soaked through, his eyes holding a quiet desperation. He shivered but stood firm, unwavering despite the cold. But it wasn't the dog alone that stole Evelyn's breath. It was what he carried. Between his teeth, wrapped in a soaked and tattered blanket, was a bundle. A tiny, unmoving bundle. Evelyn dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she reached forward. The shepherd, despite every instinct in his trained body, did not flinch. He simply released his burden into her waiting arms, then looked up at her with the kind of pleading eyes that needed no words. Evelyn peeled back the soaked fabric, and her heart stopped. A baby, a newborn, skin pale, lips tinged blue. For a split second, the world around her disappeared. No rain, no cold, just the fragile weight in her arms, and the sharp realization that every second mattered. She pressed 2 fingers to the infant's neck. A pulse. Faint. Weak. But there. Adrenaline took over. Evelyn surged to her feet, rushing inside with the baby, barking orders to no one but herself. She grabbed dry towels, wrapped the infant tight, and placed him under the heat lamp meant for recovering animals. The shepherd limped in behind her, his dark eyes never leaving the baby. He had done his part, but he wasn't leaving now. Evelyn's breath came fast as she reached for her phone. This was beyond her expertise. She needed paramedics. But before she could dial, something pulled at her pant leg. She looked down. The shepherd, his jaws clamped gently onto the fabric of her jeans. Not aggressive, not playful, just urgent. Evelyn frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't bark, didn't whimper. He just pulled. Harder this time. Evelyn glanced at the baby, then back at the shepherd. His eyes burned with a silent plea. Not here. Not yet. There was more to this story. She didn't know why, but she trusted him. Without hesitation, she grabbed her raincoat, secured the baby against her chest, and followed the dog into the storm. She had no idea where they were going. But somehow, she knew he did. The night stretched endlessly as Evelyn ran through the rain. The newborn cradled against her chest. Her breath came in short gasps, mixing with the sound of the downpour. The old German shepherd, his steps steady despite his limp, led the way through the empty streets. "Where are we going, boy?" She called over the storm, but the dog didn't falter. It was strange, illogical even, that she was following a stray in the dead of night with a fragile life in her arms. She should have called 911. She should have rushed back inside. But something deep in her gut told her this dog knew more than she did. And she trusted him. Streetlights flickered as they passed, casting eerie shadows on the wet pavement. The town was silent except for the storm, every home dark, every road empty. The shepherd picked up his pace, turning onto an old dirt path behind the rows of suburban houses. Evelyn hesitated. This wasn't the way to the hospital. But then she saw it. A car. It sat at an odd angle, nose buried in a ditch, passenger door flung open. Shattered glass sparkled against the wet road, the rain washing away the last traces of an accident long past. Evelyn's breath hitched. She approached cautiously, the shepherd right beside her, his ears pinned back. She peeked inside, and a sharp gasp escaped her lips. A woman, slumped against the driver's seat, unconscious, her head resting at an awkward angle. Blood trailed from a cut on her forehead, mixing with the rainwater dripping from her soaked clothes. Evelyn's instincts kicked in. She reached in, feeling for a pulse. Faint, weak, but alive. Her gaze darted around the car, heart hammering. An old baby carrier sat in the back seat, empty. This was the mother. And that meant, her eyes dropped to the bundle in her arms. This baby. This woman. This dog. It all connected in a way she couldn't yet understand. But there was no time to think. She shifted the baby in one arm and reached for her phone, hands shaking as she dialed 911. This is Dr. Evelyn Harper. I have an emergency, an accident victim, and an infant in critical condition. Send paramedics now. Corner of Maple and Ridge. She barely heard the operator's response. She turned back to the dog, his fur plastered against his skin, shivering but still standing guard. You led me here, she whispered, realization dawning. You saved them. The shepherd blinked, his body swaying slightly, exhaustion finally taking its toll. Evelyn dropped to her knees, pressing a hand to his soaked fur. You're hurt too, aren't you? She murmured. The dog whined softly but didn't move away. His duty wasn't finished. Not yet. Sirens cut through the storm, flashing red and blue lights illuminating the night. Paramedics rushed in, taking the baby from Evelyn's arms, checking his tiny pulse, his breathing. The mother was next, carefully pulled from the wreckage, strapped onto a stretcher, oxygen mask secured over her bruised face. As they worked, Evelyn turned back to the dog. He was watching everything unfold, his job seemingly done. Wait, she called as he turned, stepping back into the shadows. He paused. Who are you? She whispered. For the first time, his ears perked slightly. Then, as if satisfied that his mission was complete, he disappeared into the darkness. Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. The shepherd had found the baby, brought him to safety, led her to the mother. And now he was gone. But something told her this wasn't the last time she'd see him. Not by a long shot. The rain had stopped by the time the ambulance doors shut. Evelyn stood frozen, watching as the paramedics worked inside, stabilizing the mother and her child. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting an eerie glow over the empty street. She had done her part. But it wasn't just her. Her eyes flicked to the shadows where the shepherd had disappeared. Who was he? Where had he come from? The questions churned in her mind, but there were no answers. Only the undeniable truth. Without him, that baby wouldn't have survived. Without him, the mother might have bowled out in the wreckage, lost in the storm. And now he was gone. Evelyn's chest tightened, a nameless hero, vanishing like a ghost. But fate had other plans. A weak whimper broke the silence. Her pulse spiked. She turned sharply, scanning the street, the alleyways, the darkened yards. Then she saw him. The shepherd, just a few feet away, his legs trembling, his body swaying. He had made it this far, but he was spent. His strength was gone. Evelyn rushed forward. Hey, stay with me, she pleaded, lowering herself to his level. You've done enough. Let me help you now. The old dog blinked up at her. His body slumped, and for the first time, he let himself rest. 2 weeks later, the newspaper headline read, Miracle in the Storm. Dog saves infant. Leads vet to crash site. Evelyn skimmed the article, the corners of her lips curving upward. The mother had survived. The baby was recovering. A reunion was on the horizon. And the shepherd? She glanced down at the large bed in the corner of her clinic. The same dog who had fought through the storm now lay curled up, his golden brown fur finally clean, his belly full, his body healing. She had searched for his owner. No microchip, no collar, no claims. A stray, yet not lost. She had made her decision the moment she carried him into her clinic that night. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" she murmured, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. The shepherd opened one eye, his tail thumping weakly against the floor. A silent guardian. A protector. A soldier without a mission. Until now. "You have a home here," she whispered, "if you'll have me." The old dog sighed, as if he'd been waiting for those words. Outside, the storm had long passed. The sky was clear, and the first light of dawn painted the horizon. Some say angels walk among us. Some say fate works in mysterious ways. And sometimes fate has 4 legs, a scared body, and a heart that refuses to give up. And if you're lucky enough, it'll find you when you need it most.